Hey, welcome to a new video. This man called Eddie Palmer comes back to the place where he grew up. When Vivian saw her grandson at the door, she wrapped him in a big hug. She's truly happy that Eddie is back home. He went into his bedroom, which looked just like it always had. From the window, Eddie spotted the neighbor, Shelley, and her son. It's obvious that this family has its troubles. Vivian mentioned that if it wasn't for the son, she would have made Shelley and her boyfriend leave their trailer a long time ago. Are you new to this channel? Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And before we continue, also like the video. While Eddie was eating, his grandmother told him he needed to get a job and move on with his life, because sitting around feeling sorry for himself was the worst thing he could do. The next day, Eddie started job hunting, which was part of his parole requirements. However, finding work proved harder than expected. That evening, Eddie ended up drinking at a bar and reconnecting with old friends. They talked about old times. One of them, Daryl, whose son isn't into football, mentioned that Eddie's record touchdown was only beaten a few years back. Another friend, Cole, who had recently become the sheriff, was happy to see Eddie out of jail. It seemed like life might be looking up. Soon, Shelley showed up at the bar and took an interest in Eddie. The next morning, Eddie walked out of the trailer to find Vivian looking slightly shocked. By 10 a.m., she had woken him to go to church with her. Sam, Shelley's son, joined them too. At church, the parishioners whispered when they saw Eddie, and it was clear Sam didn't fit in with the other kids. After the service, while people were greeting Eddie, Daryl noticed that Sam was behaving differently, almost like a girl. Back at home, Vivian gave Sam some food, showing her kindness to the boy. Eddie, meanwhile, was still struggling to shake off his prison habits. In the morning, Vivian handed Eddie a shopping list and some cash. Eddie felt bad about taking money from his grandmother since he wasn't earning yet. As he left the house, he saw Shelley and her boyfriend heading out. At the store, Eddie noticed that they needed staff, but when he asked, the manager said the job was no longer available. Eddie suspected it was because of his criminal record. Back at home, Sam was brushing Vivian's hair. Vivian informed Eddie that Sam would be staying with them because his mother had left again. Eddie saw Sam playing with dolls and told him that dolls weren't for boys, but Sam didn't agree. During dinner, Vivian asked Eddie if he had found a job yet, which really annoyed him. The situation escalated when Vivian accused him of stealing, pushing Eddie to his limit. That night, Eddie spotted a janitor job posting at the bar and went for the interview the next morning. Unfortunately, his past conviction got in the way, and he was turned down. Eddie pleaded with Mr. Sibbs and Mr. Forbes, the school principal, explaining his good behavior during his 13 years in prison. He highlighted his past achievements as a top scholar at the University of Louisiana and a leading player in Riverside. Mr. Forbes said he'd try to help. At dinner that evening, Sam corrected Miss Vivian, stating she was wrong to accuse Eddie of theft the day before. Soon after, Eddie got a call confirming his new job as a school janitor, where Sam also attended. Sam got on well with the girls, but not the boys. Teacher Maggie Hayes always defended him. Eddie attends church every Sunday with his grandmother. Some people suggest to Vivian that she should call Child Protective Services to put Sam in an orphanage, a notion that deeply offends her. One morning, Eddie noticed Sam watching cartoons about fairy princesses and playing with dolls, mentioning that Miss Vivian was still asleep. This worried Eddie. When he checked on his grandmother, he discovered his worst fear. Vivian had died. Her funeral was held soon after, and many parishioners who respected her deeply mourned her loss. It was a significant blow to both Eddie and Sam. Eddie's boss told him he didn't need to come to work the next day. At home, a sad Sam sifted through Vivian's makeup bag. Eddie said nothing and went to the bar, returning late. Everything of Vivian's remained untouched, and Sam eventually fell asleep on the couch. The next morning, Eddie took Sam somewhere, which puzzled the boy since Eddie had asked him to pack his belongings. Eddie explained the situation to his friend at the police station, revealing that Sam's mother had left 2 weeks ago and wasn't responding to calls. Cole, now a police officer, decided to call Child Protective Services, suggesting Sam would be placed in an orphanage. Watching Eddie leave, Sam felt uneasy, though he seemed less worried than Eddie, who was genuinely concerned for him. Eventually, they both returned home. Now, Eddie needs to take care of Sam and step up as a more responsible guardian. Sam proved to be quite self-sufficient. He prepares for school on his own and catches the bus. Eddie, meanwhile, heads off to work, which helps keep his mind off things. Today, Sam's teacher, Maggie, drove him home to see how he was living. Eddie felt a bit uneasy when Maggie showed up. As Sam watched his favorite fairy princess cartoons, Maggie inquired if Eddie was managing everything all right. She mentioned she also hadn't heard from Shelley. Before leaving, Maggie gave Eddie her phone number in case he needed any assistance. Throughout the evening, Eddie tried contacting Shelley, but without success. He didn't really want to be a full-time caregiver, but there was no one else to look after Sam. Sam consistently clung to his dolls, asking Eddie if he knew when his mom would be back. Unfortunately, Eddie had no answers. Eddie himself had hardly known his own mother, and often thought of his father who had died long ago. Vivian had missed him dearly too. After wishing Sam goodnight, Eddie flipped through a scrapbook filled with old family photos and newspaper clippings. Eddie had once been a celebrated football player, but those days were long behind him. In the morning, Eddie drove Sam to school. Sam shared his love for cartoons about fairy princesses, which he adored more than anything. His mom had even bought him a princess-themed lunchbox on sale. Later that day, Lucille, Cole's wife, approached Eddie to ask if he was okay with Sam playing with their daughter, Emily. Lucille mentioned that Sam saw Eddie as a father figure, so she wanted his permission. Eddie had no objections, though the request stirred mixed feelings in him. At 5 in the evening, Eddie arrived as planned to pick up Sam. Lucille invited him inside, and although Eddie didn't really want to enter, he felt it would be rude to decline. Inside, he found himself part of a toy tea party, and he was quite relieved when it was time to leave. Eddie found it strange that Sam was spending time with Emily instead of other boys. That evening, Eddie decided to take Sam to a football game and shared stories about his own playing days. At the game, they bumped into Maggie, who suggested that she, Sam, and Eddie should go bowling together sometime. As they settled into their seats, Daryl leaned over to warn Eddie against getting involved with Shelley, calling her trouble. Eddie wasn't interested in Shelley, though. His main concern was her son. Meanwhile, the football field was alive with action, including a new player who had recently surpassed Eddie's record. Meanwhile, Eddie asked Daryl if he knew where the wrestlers were now living. Eddie had been trying to find the father and son without any luck. Daryl suggested that Eddie should let go of the past. He also believed that Eddie had been imprisoned unfairly, mentioning that the guy who accused him often boasted about his father's wealth. During the game, Sam mimicked the cheerleader's moves. After taking Sam home later, Eddie headed to the bar to drink with his friends. There, a drunk Daryl started acting out, which Sibbs didn't appreciate. Eddie quickly intervened to take him away. The next morning, Sam woke Eddie up early because they were going bowling with Maggie. While Sam enjoyed himself, Maggie and Eddie had a chance to talk. Eddie shared that he had been to university for about a year before experiencing a very different kind of life education. Maggie, on her part, discussed her failed marriage and her decision to move closer to her family after her divorce. Eddie was getting used to the idea of being responsible for Sam. At work, he apologized to Sibbs for Daryl's behavior. Meanwhile, Principal Forbes asked Sam how he felt about his new guardian, leaving Sam puzzled as to why he was being questioned. Every few weeks, Eddie visits the police station as part of his parole requirements. Eddie and Sam spend a great deal of time together. One day, Sam asked why Eddie always had to go to the police. Eddie admitted that many years ago, he had done something very wrong to someone and tried to take someone else's money, which he had since paid for. Sam also had something to confess. He had stolen a toy from a classmate and now felt guilty. Eddie advised him that returning the toy would make him feel better. Through this, Eddie found a new purpose in life, feeling needed and gaining strength from it. One morning, Eddie and Sam were making breakfast together. Eddie was mindful not to let Sam eat too many sweets, knowing it was bad for his health. Following Eddie's advice, Sam returned the stolen toy. Soon after, they celebrated Sam's birthday. Maggie and Emily came to wish him well. Eddie gifted Sam a ukulele, and though the boy wasn't particularly musical, he was thrilled with the gift. While the kids played, Maggie inquired about Eddie's mother. He explained that she left when he was 5, and Vivian had stepped into that role. Later, while helping Eddie sort through his mail, Maggie found a letter from a lawyer about Vivian's will. It turned out Vivian had left her house and all her belongings to the church. Eddie was taken aback by this news. Once the house was sold, he would have 30 days to move out. Sam was often teased by his classmates because he looked different from them. When Eddie saw this, he defended Sam, which scared the young bullies. At home, Sam expressed his wish to write to the Fairy Princess show, hoping to be on it. Eddie initially tried to talk him out of it, saying the show wasn't meant for boys, but Sam didn't see a problem. At the store, Sam picked out a princess costume for Halloween. Eddie attempted to persuade him against it, but his efforts were in vain. An elderly woman at the store scolded Eddie, calling him a criminal and saying he shouldn't be looking after Sam. This upset Sam, who boldly told her to mind her own business. It mattered to Eddie that Sam thought well of him, and this belief started to resonate with Eddie himself. In school, Sam declared to his teacher that he would be Princess Penelope for Halloween, and despite Eddie's attempts, he couldn't change Sam's mind and ultimately had to accept his choice. At the party, the other kids mocked him and nicknamed him Samantha. However, the teacher showed up dressed as Mr. Forbes, showing support for Sam. That evening, Maggie invited Eddie and Sam over for dinner. Sam was visibly happy, enjoying the sweets. Gathering her courage, Maggie asked Eddie about his time in jail. It was difficult for Eddie to talk about, but he opened up. In college, he was a star football player until an injury ended his career, and doctors told him he could never play again. This led to a deep depression, and upon returning home, Eddie began making poor choices. He mentioned a peer who bragged about his father's wealth. which eventually led them to attempt a robbery at the boy's home. However, the homeowner returned unexpectedly, and in a panic, Eddie attacked him, marking the gravest error of his life. By the time the story ended, Sam had fallen asleep, prompting Maggie to suggest Eddie spend the night. The day after school, Emily invited Sam over again, which made him happy. During a break, Eddie went online to look up how to become a legal guardian. Later, he visited Maggie in her classroom to ask for her help. He wanted to donate Vivian's belongings to charity. Suddenly, Sam burst into the house crying, hurt by something Daryl had done. Eddie was determined not to let it slide. Despite Maggie's attempts to dissuade him, Eddie headed to the bar where he confronted Daryl, who defensively called Sam abnormal. Eddie ended up teaching Daryl a lesson, and it took several others to pull him away. He also warned Coles, who hadn't defended Sam, threatening to expose him and Daryl as accomplices in their misdeeds, unless they backed off. When Eddie got home, Maggie immediately sensed what had happened and reminded him that conflicts can always be resolved peacefully. Realizing Eddie was unmoved, Maggie left. The next morning, Eddie reassured Sam that he wasn't at fault. It was Daryl who was the bad person. Eddie then helped Sam write a letter to the Fairy Princess show, fulfilling a dream that no one else had supported. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. It was Shelley, looking worse for wear. She intended to take Sam back home. Although Sam was distraught, Eddie comforted him, saying he could visit any time, which led to a heartfelt hug. Eddie was deeply saddened, but acknowledged that Sam should be with his mother. Noticing the ukulele, Shelley realized she had missed Sam's birthday, and quickly claimed she had a gift for him too, though she was clearly making it up on the spot. Eddie was heartbroken and tried to keep busy with work. Eventually, he mustered the courage to tell Maggie that Shelley had come back. Their conversation didn't go well, leading Eddie to consider drowning his sorrows at the bar, though he decided against it. The next morning on the porch, he saw Sam, who sadly shared that his mother's boyfriend, Jerry, had thrown away his lunchbox, calling him a disgrace. Eddie comforted Sam and was about to take him to school when Sam revealed that he and his mom would soon be moving in with Jerry, meaning he'd have to switch schools. Eddie spent the day lost in thought, realizing Jerry was as morally questionable as Shelley. Later that day, Eddie found out that Child Protective Services had taken Sam. While Shelley wept, Eddie hurried to the station. A social worker told him a court hearing was set for Monday to decide whether Sam would stay with his mother or go to an orphanage. That evening, Eddie went to Shelley's trailer to ask for custody of Sam. Shelley was furious, claiming Eddie was no better than her. Eddie tried to argue that the court wouldn't return Sam to her because of her health issues, as she vehemently claimed she would change her ways for her son and threw Eddie out. He had no choice but to turn to Maggie for support. She agreed to accompany him to court. In court, the judge acknowledged Eddie's efforts at reform, but stated that he couldn't apply for custody until he secured permanent housing and completed his probation. Tearfully, Eddie expressed his understanding of abandonment and his desire to care for Sam, but the judge dismissed his application. At that moment, Shelley burst into the courtroom pleading for her son's return, arguing that Sam, who struggled with social interactions, needed his mother's presence. Moved by her plea, the judge decided to send Sam back to his home with Shelley. Every day, Eddie could hear Shelley and Jerry fighting in their trailer. When he saw that Shelley had slipped back into her harmful habits, Eddie took Sam away. They drove for a while until stopping at a gas station where Eddie called Maggie, only to learn that Shelley had reported him to the police. He was now a wanted man. Since Shelley was Sam's mother, the law would likely favor her. Eddie assured Sam that he would sort everything out, and then turned himself in to the police. Officer Coles, recognizing that Shelley was not in a stable condition, planned to have Sam stay temporarily with Maggie. Eddie was arrested, and as he was taken away, Sam cried out, begging the police to release Eddie and yelling at his mother for not loving him. Sam chased the police car in tears, and Eddie struggled to keep his own emotions in check as he was taken back behind bars. However, not long after, Coles came to his cell to announce that Eddie could be released. Shelley had altered her statement, claiming she had asked Eddie to take Sam to buy groceries, leading to all charges being dropped. Now, Eddie and Coles were square. Eddie immediately went to see Maggie, who was taking care of Sam. Soon after, Shelley showed up at the doorstep, but Sam refused to speak to her. After much reflection, Shelley decided to grant custody of Sam to Eddie, recognizing him as a good man. It was a tough choice because, despite everything, she loved her son, but knew he would be better off with Eddie. Mother and son shared a heartfelt embrace. Now Eddie could officially become Sam's father. Things were also looking up at Eddie's job. He and Sam were getting ready to move out of Vivian's house. In the mailbox, they discovered a letter from the Princess Fairy show addressed to Sam. He was thrilled by this. So that was all for this video. If you enjoyed it, give us a like and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell, so you'll be the first to see our new videos. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.